the middle of the night, a new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Hello everyone, I am geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Kilauea volcano update. Today, Thursday, November 4th, 2021. This is our second attempt. Mahalo for sticking with us if you guys try and catch us live, and we had some technical issues here. But we're going to reboot here from the start and tell you guys our whole menu for our broadcast today. And we're going to start off talking about the changes on the west vent and the current eruption, which you guys are seeing here, playing here next to us. Changes in the vent that's kind of tubed over or crusted over its entry point into the lava lake. We'll talk about the lava lake rising and lifting up that whole vent, and also starting to onlap onto that lowest downdrop block that's a part of that caldera collapse from 2018. We'll talk comparisons of the volumes and rates of our eruption now to late 2020 as well as 2018, and of course we'll cover all the photos and videos from USGS and their text updates and all that kind of stuff. So mahalo you guys for joining us and checking out the update on Kilauea here today. Mauna Loa is quiet, by the way, so we'll get back to Mauna Loa in the future, but we won't cover it too much today. So you guys are seeing video here. This is video I took this morning. It's on the screen right now, showing this broader covered tubed over zone, right? It's kind of a broad archway. It's actually pretty thick as well as wide, which is the largest it's been after having various iterations of archways and little crust over spots on this entry channel over the last month or so. And then sometimes it's been higher up or lower down. This is a video I took this past weekend. You can see it lower down here, and you can see these nice eddies that are forming here as the lava circulates around that entry point, which is really fascinating to me. Let's see if I can get it higher up on the screen so you guys can see it too. Right in there. Nice little eddies there in both directions, that way and that way. Right. And really changing dynamics at the entry point there. And the lava is still spattering. You can see it's hitting against the inner parts of the back of the spatter cone back over here and on the sides as well. And so it's still growing a bit, although you imagine that chunks do fall back in as well. So there is still some accumulation of spatter, although overall, the higher fountains that we saw previously in previous weeks of the eruption that might have been up to twice as tall standing fountains as this vent have now been replaced by more of what's called this low roiling and spatter bursting. Right, so these bursts can be pretty tall, just as tall as the previous fountain, sometimes close to twice as high as the actual edifice, the actual cone itself. But just once in a while, like a gas burp kind of thing, where it just kind of poof one time, like a one firework shot, rather than the actual standing gurgling fountain that was there before. And that may well be because the whole filling lake is rising. The vent that's erupting through the lake now is getting further and further submerged. It still has enough oomph, we'll call it, right, to come up through the lake and keep spattering and roiling within that cone and feed this entry into the lake here. But that's the situation right there. Yeah, so there we go. To make this a little clearer, and we'll post these videos for further perusal for you guys online at some point in the next few days here. But for further perusal here, we'll compare what we saw here and on October 4th. Let's zoom it out to make sure everyone can see it. Back to what we saw on the 21st of October. So 21st, October 30th, November 4th here. So you can see just in the last couple weeks here, the evolution, the change. And these are all sped up time lapses. They're all faster than is natural, right? But you can see how there was that little bridge at the intermittent point, but early on there wasn't, and it was more like a rapids and lots of spattering all throughout there. So that is the evolution of that west vent there, as far as that entry point into the lake itself. This is something we can get a different look at from the webcams. Dane helped us compile this S1 webcam view. And so we're zoomed into the S1 vent a whole long way, so we'll let it loop around here so you get a little bit broader view for context where we actually are. The whole camera view is a lot broader than this. We've cropped it halfway just for this shot, but you see there's the west vent on the left edge of the screen and the entry point down over here, and it's that little zone right in there, that channel that we're examining more closely, and that's where we're going to zoom it in at right here. And there's quite a lot of flicker, we'll call it, right, just from the different lighting conditions and the gases and all that. But you really can see the evolution of that entry point right there, from more of this rapids area right through here, falling down and crossing over in various little archways, and partly exposed, partly not exposed there, coming to more current there. So that's the evolution of it. And what I wanted to point out as well is that it's more easily visible from this view, and this time lapse is nice because the camera's there and we can animate it across longer than I'm willing to stand at the overlook. I'll leave my camera there. Is we can look at the difference between this ending point of the vent as far as how far it's grown out into the lake, which is about right there. And let's see, I might have to change my setting here to draw that so it will stay. And if we rewind it here, we can see that earlier on. Let's put it right in there. Earlier on, the edge of the cone is more in here. So you see it's coming upwards and it's coming outwards as well, right? And I think this outwards motion is maybe not so much the stuff moving outwards, but it's actually material from below coming up and actually growing this thing from below. And that's something that'll be easier to see on a thermal camera when we get to that, which we'll do next here. But just to let that all stuff clear so you guys can see past it. And then let me drag it back and forth here a little more quickly so you can really see this change of it going up and growing outwards at the same time. Really pixelated but zoomed in view from the S1 camera from the USGS HVO here for all their all their public data that they're putting out there. So turning to their thermal camera, we've zoomed into this one as well, and this is the west vent growing right here, zoomed in on this thermal camera, and we back it up to the beginning. The eruption, you see it's not quite visible there, and so as I play the clip here, zoomed in clip, you see a couple of things happening. First, when we're in a zoomed in view, you see this rim of the vent growing upwards, and you see quite a lot of spatter, the brighter yellow stuff, falling over the edges and coloring it up into these lighter pink colors there over and over that, and you actually see it changing shape as chunks fall in and chunks are attached. But it's part of a larger process that you see all of that within the vent here, with the sides of the areas where the spatter isn't falling as much, as well as the islands all rising upwards at a similar rate. So you see this uplifting of everything, all the crusted areas, and some of this crust seems to be back over here on this area where the vent is sitting. And so the vent is able to actually rise up, even as it builds and collapses through spattering. It's able to rise up by the lifting of that crust that it's sitting on as well, and the whole thing is coming upwards. So there it is, forwards and backwards, to make it a little bit more apparent there. And how wide is the vent? I see the question come in here. Mahalo, Mr. Jim. We haven't gotten exact dimensions in the height. We've been told that the height of it is about 20 to 25 meters, 80 feet or so. It looks to me that's like it's getting broader, so I would estimate maybe it's twice that wide at its base, something like that, right? So that would make it somewhere in a range of 150, 200 feet wide, something like that. It's kind of getting sprawling outwards, right? That's what that growing out into the lake is making it do, is sprawl outwards, right over there. So let's see if I can maybe just drag this for some extra added effect here. You can see the real, kind of by flickering it, like how it really comes up into view, and really the view has changed quite a bit, and everything is rising upwards, right? And including these areas off to the side of the vent. And maybe I'll let it go just one more time here, so you can see these areas on the side of the vent rising upwards, independent of the vent building up here in the middle, which is also interesting, and crusting over and forming that arched entryway into the lake right there. The entry itself is interesting. It kind of flickers around back and forth, and it seems like maybe it's affected by how much lava is coming in, the exact geometry of that channel. You can see at some points it actually comes out pretty far into the lake, and other times it's a little bit closer in. So that's something that's interesting to me to keep an eye on as we continue through our update today. All right, let's move on from the thermal camera and show you guys our next topic of interest here. Our next milestone is that released here as a telephoto image from the USGS, showing what they caption here as the lava lake has risen high enough to start covering the lowest portion of the down-drop block on the north side of Halemaumau. Lava is just starting to cover a small area immediately south to the right of Ephemeral, which is a white steam and yellow sulfur patch close to the northeast margin edge. So there is that sulfur and steam patch, and just to the right of it, right in here, that's the area they're talking about. So I can come in a little closer here. And just starting to, you can see there's a little bit of a cliff right there, there's a little bit of a cliff right there, and right in there, there's a little gully almost, right? And right in there is where the lava is starting to come on. And this was taken November 1st, so that was 3 days ago already. And since then, we've seen this actually flow out into a tongue, something like this. And so we'll show you guys the details of that here next. But that's the source of this is USGS from November 1st. And so to look at that, we're going to look at a compilation here, taken from the B1 camera. Once again, thanks, Dane, for compiling that. And we'll loop through a couple different views here. First is this broader view, so you can see this whole crater sequence, but we're really going to focus in on this right side over here. So you can see the whole crater floor rising. There's a trench, and there is our fuming patch right in there. Oh no, I gotta zoom it back out. Right in there. So this is our little little gully right in there that we're seeing flow out. So a little bit slower in. You can see it's once again pretty grainy because that's the nature of the USGS. But you see a couple little lobes. There's one. Let's see if I can put it back. Maybe I'll pause it. Like a clear, nice contrast one, right? You see there's actually a lobe down here. You can't quite see it behind the edge of this block that's sticking out at the top of the cliff here in front of the camera. And then the most obvious lobe is this one right over here. And that's that little lobe that's we just saw from that other telephoto view looking back in that direction. Right in there. So once again, you can see that animation of, just so it's clear here how much the crater floor is rising. Right in there. You can see it really coming up. And interesting, you don't see any surface lava coming over the top here, right? It's all coming from below. It's coming underneath it. And you see this darker material here is oozing up between this hardened crust and the wall of the crater. And so you see that ooze up material all through here. You see it all through there as well. And it's this material that's coming up and oozing up and out and starting to lap onto this lowest block. This lowest block, it's hard to tell from this angle, but if I maybe come back over here, it's actually a big ramp that goes uphill, and so it's not going to flood the whole area. It's going to just kind of cover this flatter spot at the bottom first, and then just very slowly encroach up, and up. And as that happens, it'll be riding up the crater walls elsewhere as well. So also from this point of view, you can see there's a second spot that's a little bit closer to the west vent. The west vent's right over here. Here is our old west vent island right in there, and not as easy to see in this view, but against this back crater wall is also a little bit of a low spot. And it's a little bit steeper going up that way, but at some point we're going to see it start to put a little tongue out in that direction as well, if it keeps its upward rates going for long enough. And so that's the spillover zones right there. And so here's our most recent, maybe I'll just give it a reload to make sure we have our most recent view of a 24-hour animation from the V1 camera from the USGS, and that gives us a snapshot of, it's still loading here, and gives us a snapshot of where that flow is right now. Let's get the orientation here. So there's maybe down in here, and also it looks like that original vent might have been in here. So it seems like it's broadening and maybe spreading out a little bit down through there. So not very quickly, but slowly. You see a couple of spots of light through here, which is that fresher lava coming up through those ooze up spots, right? So showing that there is still some movement going on down there. All right. So yeah, the vent has been submerged and it's still erupting. It's been erupting through, obviously the deeper the vents are, the more you have that everything pushing back on a pressure, and you could potentially stop it. That's what we saw the last eruption. At some point, they slow down enough. That eruption essentially ended, but this one has been submerged. Really, I think I saw the first report of the vent lava being at the base of the vent was October 3rd, so it was a full month ago. So it's been erupting through the lava most of the last month, and everything you've seen. It's just a matter of maybe it's getting too far under so that it can't. That it's just changing. That gap is widening, and more of the flow rather than coming up and out the vent is staying underneath that crust and able to flow laterally and just fill that whole underneath the crust area. So you can see that in this graph of the depth over the last week here. Everything has been rising pretty steadily. You see this little variations up and downs, and we've just speculated that this might be something you would expect with gas release signals, little gas variations. It could cause small little pistoning in the area of where the laser is pointed. The laser is pointed just to one spot near the west vent. And we know that the whole crust is uneven, where that eastern part of the crater is actually 7 meters, 23 feet lower than under the vent. So the whole thing is tipped, and the lava is going underneath one side and lifting the whole thing up, and then oozing out that edge on the far sides as well. But despite all that, the trend seems to be just up, sometimes a little faster, sometimes a little slower, but consistently up, right? You can see that we're up to 282 meters above sea level under that vent area right there, and that's getting close to 800 feet. I want to say it's like 798, something like that. So here's a view from the KW camera I captured earlier today. We have a little bit of moisture coming back into the area, so there's a rainbow coming into view here. And this is that area we're just looking at, that little down drop block. That previous camera, we're looking at the B1 is positioned over here, and it looks down kind of like that. Right, so that rock in a way is somewhere in here, and we can't see this lowest section right in there. We can see a fuming spot and right there, an overflow spot right there, and all the way further back. But we have a little bit of a blind spot. That's the view there. There are other images released. So there is this one was also released by the USGS along with that telephoto. So you can see here, maybe not through the webcam, but through a similar camera as that telephoto view. More of where these cliffs are and how close the lava is, and you see the cliff is really high right over here, and right over here is the bottom of that ledge, and this is an area where it's flatter and might cover this area faster before it starts rising up the ramp off in this direction over here. So it gets taller and taller and taller off in that direction there. So that's the on-lap area. That second area is more down in here. Not really as visible from here. I pointed out some of the other photographs. But turning to our thermal, this is our F1 camera, the whole crater view now. And this is the same view as we were just looking at. So it's back in this upper left corner is the area of that overflow. So right through there, these are the ooze up flows, right? And the date on my thing, you probably can't read it. It's the 29th of October here. Was when it was all active, all at the same time, all the way across here. Right, ooze ups along the whole backside of the crater. So let's see if I can navigate this. There's a way to, if I do it just right, we can focus in on that one area. And you can see those dancing pink lines in the back there. That's those ooze up flows. That's what's actually happening, visible in the thermal imagery here. And so that's the view of that overflow area. While we're on a thermal and a wide view here, we can look at the overall patterns. I'll just move it fairly quickly through the last week here. You can see overall pretty similar patterns. You see more of these ooze ups in the perimeters, especially back around here. And you still see overflows from the gap between Old West Vent Island and this northern peninsula right over here. So this little northwest pool zone is getting flooded still right through there. You still see the South Pool getting flooded as well from overflows in that direction. And you also are seeing some closer to the vent coming around this channel on the backside of this Old West Vent Island and kind of flooding connecting through there. So that's the combination of where the lava is actually flowing. You can see in these latest images right here, pretty easily visible, that coherent cone all the way across that has that essentially a tunnel that's a lava tube that's feeding the flow through the base of that cone and into the lava lake right there. So that's the pattern of it. This very, very last frame that we have lined up here is from earlier today, and we'll see that there's some more recent ones than this, is getting interesting to me, because what you see here is you start to see a different character of pattern on the fringes of the lava lake. Right in here, it's starting to look like it's doing the crustal overturning, forming one solid sheet, spilling over. It's not circulating as much. Like maybe this is also rising out of the lava, and the lava is going to retreat, and the lava lake surface is going to contract and come back to over here. And you see that a little bit over here on this northern edge as well, where it's getting less and less common to see the lava filling here, but more of the overflows in that area. So if more lava is going underneath the crust and it's lifting the crust up, then you essentially are tipping this whole area upwards, and the lava can't flow over it. It's going to basically stay over here and shrink in surface area back towards the vent is what we're seeing happening. So interesting stuff going on there. I want to focus a little more. Let's see if I can do this again. Hopefully with some success as well. But I want to focus in on this area back over here and right there, that zone right in there. That's early on. Let me come around here to more recently. Oh, we got a lot there. There we go. So there's the most recent frames, and what I want to point out is that you can see there's some loose blocks. They're drifting from the edges, both on that left edge of the lake up there, and on the bottom edge of the lake right there. Right? So it seems like there's something interesting happening there, or block right here, and it's drifting away from the margin. And this is an area we've seen upwelling from below before as well. So it's interesting if lava's coming up and pushing up this whole surface. Maybe it's breaking off chunks of rock and pushing them over, even while it's allowing this area to essentially, by lifting, drain the lava back towards the deeper part of the lake that's closer to the vent right over here, the more open area. So that's the overall pattern, is the lava lake surface is shrinking. It's kind of a subtle thing. But we have a comparison. We have some maps released by the USGS here. So I just plotted it up real quick, and the red line is this eruption, and the blue line is December 2020 to May 2021. And this is plotting just the amount of active area of the lava lake. So you see that in late 2020, we came up pretty quickly to maxed out at about 80 acres. That was just how, the crater was deeper, so that was filling the whole crater at the time. And then it started crossing over from the east side over as well, and dropped off that pattern. So at around 35 days into the eruption, there were actually only 25 active acres. And at the same point today, 35 days into our eruption, we're at about 30 acres, so slightly more. We started off with a bigger crater area that we flooded, so we went higher faster. But we also came down a lot sooner to where we were actually at a lower active area a lot faster than in the last eruption. So, but we, in the end, have ended up more or less in the same place, following more or less the same pattern of shrinking area. And you see the last eruption, if there were to follow a similar rate, who knows if it will or won't. It depends on the output. It could, it's looking pretty similar to that blue line there. That's maybe what I'll say and leave it at that. All right, so here's the last 24 hours time lapse from the USGS automatic. And I thought this was an interesting one because it happened to catch you really don't see a whole lot of overflows. You do see a lot of this area becoming stagnant and not as much circulation, right? More visible in the last 24 hours right through there. Let's see, look at the north area over here. And also looking more stagnant through there. So perhaps shrinking even more since that map was made. And one last thing to focus on here is this entry point area right in here, this brightest spot, right? It looks like a yellow snake, and it looks like it's leaving its den here, and it's traveling out. This cobra is traveling out to different parts of the lake. So it starts off kind of close, and then you see it goes out further, it comes back in, and that's really interesting to me, right? Because within this last 24 hours, like how much can the geometry really changed? Or are there variations in output that we're actually getting some window into by it's actually just coming out faster, so it sloshes out further into the lake, and it's coming out a little slower, so it doesn't slosh out quite as far? Or is it maybe more of a geometry where it's pointed more down and into the lake rather than out and across the lake? And well, I don't have any answers. I'm just pointing out the observation there. That's something you can see moving around, is that point of light right through there, right? Even as you see this bubbling and whirling within the crater of the west vent right through there. So that's the coolest stuff that's going on here. You might ask, what's going to happen next? That's a question we're getting a lot, with the volcano. And how long is it going to last? What's it going to do next? How does it compare to the last eruptions? And it's been hard to get a hold of all that, but we'll first start off with the deformation data. Here's a tilt over the last 2 days, and the scale is essentially less than 1 microradian top to bottom, so we just move right on past that. You see some variations, could be similar to the gas things that we talked about earlier, little gas variations. For the whole last week, our scale is 2 microradians. Similar story, similar possible explanations there. For the last month, we see still that 6.2 earthquake that occurred just after we turned flat here. And we've really, in comparison to that earlier deflation that was happening before that, we've been essentially flat. We've come up, went down slightly, we came up slightly, but all within a range of, I would say, 3 microradians. So pretty much flat as well. It's about as flat as we see Kilauea yet. So it happens to just be at that perfect equilibrium, at least as visible on the tilt. So we have used gas as a proxy for effusion rate, eruption rate in the past as well. So we're now past the high spike of measurements. So our highest measurement close to a month ago is at about 7,000 tons per day. Right, you can see that there's this period between about a month ago and maybe 2 weeks ago or so, where we're having a larger spread up to 7,000 tons per day, going and dropping quite low as well, really, right? So really you could say that since about the 15th or so, we've been down on this less than 4,000 tons per day range. And little variations, but overall, there's nothing to show like a clear climb or a clear drop. It's just bouncing around some middle average without a whole lot of variation, really. So also pretty flat there, no indication of what's going on there. So that's really been hard to get a hold of what it might actually do next. So, right spot. Yeah, here we go. So what we've been able to do is, what's going on here? This is, right, okay, yeah, that's what it's supposed to show, right? Okay. This is the most recent map released by the USGS. It was released today, and it's got similar areas of active surface, but I really like to zoom in on, well, we'll show you guys a map first. There it is, more zoomed in. The red area is the active surface. The yellow is the islands from previous stuff that was from before the eruption, and this orange is a west vent over here. And you also have marked out here this the edge of this perched cap over here, right, with this channel where the ooze-ups are happening, outboard of that, between that purple dash line and the crater wall right through there. And so while we're on this map and looking topography and the question of whether it might spill out of the crater because of hitting this lowest ledge, here's a topography to show that it's like kind of a scoop out zone right through here. And there's kind of a lower zone right through there, a lower inner edge of the crater that can get filled next, right? This whole zone that's kind of bulged upwards right here. There's a big hump with a high spot here, and it goes low over this way, and here's that one low spot. And it goes downhill this way, and here's the other low spot right through there. So that's the two areas we'll start to see it to lap onto those lowest ledges right through there. And even after that, if I zoom it out a little bit, you'll see that there's a whole other crater for it to fill beyond that. That's over here. Right? And I gotta click the button to zoom it out more, right? That was here's that one where it's in now, where it might fill that next little ledge. There's a ledge above that. And there's another ledge above that, which is the caldera wall, which is all through here. And if it gets up to, somewhere in this range, it can start spilling out into here, and eventually it would spill over south out of the caldera in that direction, away from any people, any infrastructure, any of that. So really, this is, as it currently stands, not a threat to anyone. And even for that to happen, it would take years and years and years and years and years. It would have to really have some bursts of eruption rate in the middle there to actually have a chance to get there and not have something else happen first. All right, but the nerdy stuff is here. When I zoom into the statistics, they actually offer statistics through yesterday, November 3rd at 12 p.m. And so the lake surface is at 2618 feet, 798 meters above sea level. The thickness of this eruption, 180 feet, 55 meters. It's coming up. The volume thus far, 7.5 billion gallons, or 28.2 million cubic meters. We'll be using the metric when we do our graphs here, and that number will be important, 28.2. And the active lake area is down to 30 acres, 12 hectares, with a full extent of the whole area of the lake at 153 acres, 62 hectares, right? So that includes all that hardened crust with lava underneath it as well. So when we take not just this map, but all the other maps that have been released by the USGS, various iterations across this eruption, that's when we can get these comparisons of lava lake volumes, right? So once again, the red line is our current eruption, the blue is December 2020 to May 2021. And at the bottom, this is days into the eruption. So we're gonna call 0 days in the beginning of both eruptions. We're just gonna count days going to the right, like we did in our previous graph here. On this axis is our total volume in a million cubic meters, right? So these numbers are all in the million cubic meter range, and you can see that in both eruptions we began pretty quickly, and then slow down, and eventually we're still coming up until the eruption ended. We're still rising, but at a slower and slower rate as time went on. And you can see that our red line here, our current eruption, is mimicking very closely the last eruption, but you may note that the total volumes of the red are lower consistently than the blue, which means that through 35 days of the eruption, we've had 28 million cubic meters, but back in December 2020 to January 2021, we were at 31 million cubic meters, right? And at every spot, every benchmark previous to our current point, we are behind, which really, there's, one way to put that. This eruption so far has been smaller than the last one, December 2020. And that's something that's been hard to comprehend, because we see all this lava coming out. We see these bigger fountains. It seems like it's surged a lot to cover the whole crater floor. But there you have it. As far as total volume coming out, we are behind.
Yeah, and that's kind of crazy, because it wasn't just like, the odd man making estimations that, it's bigger than the last one. It was volcanologists that were saying, yeah, look how much bigger it is than the last one. And it's not, like, just in the data.
Yeah, so there's some of the, I'll show you more different ways to slice and dice this, right? But this is fundamentally the most important thing right here is, we're essentially overall pretty similar to the last eruption and slightly behind it, right? So the question has come up this week when we're talking to people in our community about how does this compare to 2018. So I've put on a little bit more complicated stuff on here, but we still have our blue line, we still have our red line, and that's from the last graph is the same here, right? And I've just put on here the diamonds to show the actual data points that guide that shape of the curve. I've also put on here in orange, this is the 2018 lava, right? And also in slightly yellower, the 2018 outflow. So at the beginning, it's how much lava is flowing out of Halemaumau before the collapse begins. Then the collapse catches up and overtakes it and drives things from there, right? So in comparison, since I opened this can of worms, I better do it properly here, right? So here's our blue line and our red line. In 2018, I put these data points on here, so we want to point this out. We only have this one guiding data point. So really the shape of this orange line may be more, maybe I should make my thing orange. Let's try to get it in orange here. Maybe the shape of this orange line should be more like the others, where it comes up first and then flattens out, or something like this, right? If we had more data points, it might look something like that. And then it essentially happened again. It went upwards and then it started curving over a second time, and that was because of that two-phase eruption, with the first being the local lava in the Lower East Rift Zone, and the second being lava draining from Halemaumau coming into it, right? And that's why this yellow line is important, because while this orange line was having this pattern, we had a steeper, faster rate of withdrawal of magma from the summit area, and that was happening at the same time. And so the key difference here is, one, the vent was at low elevation. That allowed it to drain out by gravity, and so when you have a vent at the top of the volcano, you just don't have that gravitational drain out, right? So you don't have that happening. And two, because of the drain out, you can see that we had lost more volume from the summit than we had actually erupted early on, and that's why early in that eruption we were very confident in saying, okay, the bulk of the magma is still coming, it's still coming, and that in those first few weeks we knew that because of this intuitive and now since then published data points, right, where you can see here this orange collapse line is ahead of the lava output line. And then suddenly the output begins and overtakes it, and eventually ends up outpacing the collapse because the magma ends up having been compressed. And when you decompress it, you can actually allow it to expand, and you get more volume that comes out than you collapse in the end, ultimately. But the point being that by this point, 35 days into the eruption, right, you can see that we're clearly the same on our red line today as we were in the last December 2020. And very, very different from the trajectories that we saw in 2018. So very different for 2018. It just shows how unique 2018 was, how unusual that actually was. And I didn't put in a graphic here, but we've revisited the statistics, and of all Kilauea eruptions since 1790, 70% are at Kilauea Summit, 25% in the Upper and Middle East Rift Zone, and only 2% make the Lower East Rift Zone, with another 3% making the Southwest Rift Zone. So those lowest rift zones are really rare, and when it happens, that's where the populations are impacted. So it's tragic, and something we're watching for and aware of and monitoring all the time. But we're not going to bet on that at any point in time. Only 2% of all eruptions making it down there. It's just really bad when it does happen. But really unique, and you can see what we're getting now is more of the 70% normal at the summit pattern of what's going on. And so we're following the same pattern as the last eruption, and there's no reason for the Lower East Rifts to worry about what's happening right now. All right, that's kind of the point where I'm trying to get with all this. So some other ways to compare this before we take a round of questions here. The volume rate, right? The actual how much is coming out. That depends on the interval of how often we get the data. So I haven't had a chance to really go into my GIS program and calculate from the DEMs the exact volume to get the exact rate of this red line early on. And in fact, even a blue line for early eruption, we know that the rate spiked pretty high, but the actual value, I would not hang my hat on that. It was a much higher value, but exactly what it was is something we'll have to wait for publication, right? But certainly there's a spike, and then it comes down, and we saw this before. It came up, it came down, and then it had a little secondary bulge here, and then it essentially slowly tailed off after that, right? So that was the eruption in 2020-21. And since then, we know that we spiked high. My values, are really wild, but whatever they happen to be, it goes up as well. It comes down here as a little bulge, and here we are at our most recent value. Within the last, I think it's been 2 weeks, we've had a 4.1 cubic meters per second output. The previous week to that was 7.6. Previous to that was 6.6. Before that was 4.2. So we've been more or less in this low range ever since week 3 of the eruption. And it was early on. Our first value here that's believable is 28.5. There was something much higher earlier on. We'll have to come back to you guys on that exact value as we have a chance to go calculate those volumes in the DM. But the pattern is really interesting there as well, right? So coming really high and going back down. This is just kind of based on an interval. There's another way to do this, which is kind of the cumulative. You just take the whole time and see what's the average for the whole length. And it has a similar pattern, but it's not quite as bumpy. So I'll show you guys that here. That's what this blue and red line are. Up quickly, then down, and the red one I didn't put in the up quickly because I don't know how far to put it exactly, but also coming down. That's a pattern of eruption volume, cumulative over the eruption. So I put in here also in yellow the 2018. Right, 2018 was unusual in a sense where it began pretty low, right? In fact, this first little output, the first 2 weeks of eruption, our total number was 7 cubic meters per second of how much came out. That's not that far from what we have now. The difference was when the magma from the summit started arriving, and then we jumped up from that, call it about 10 to several tens to past 100 into the hundreds, and it may have not exactly been like this. It may have been more like that, right? As far as that other curve, but the ultimate ending up point was 150 cubic meters per second for 2018. Averaged for the whole 3 months, 150. Right, and so our average now for the whole eruption, we're down here in a range of somewhere in the 6 or so, I'd say 6 to 7 range. So very, very different things. 2018 was very unique, and you can see how it was accelerating. It was essentially like a runaway process, and that's where that whole cascading origin of it, right, occurring like that, and that's why I think it doesn't make as much sense to a lot of people, like why and how that happened. The pattern, if you look at any of these statistics, this just breaks all the patterns in crazy ways. So to just drive the point home here, here's from Matt Patrick and others. This is the cyclic effusions of lava. And you see here, during several surge events following summit collapses, right, July 26th, 29th, and August 2nd here, you see changing from a background now of 500 cubic meters per second. This is towards the end of the eruption, 500. And after a surge, it's getting up to 1,500, almost 2,000 cubic meters per second. And coming back down. So this happens over and over and over, from 500 to 1,000, 500 up to 2,000, right? So in comparison, our 4 or our peak of, somewhere in the hundreds is really, even if we have a peak at 2,000 and came back down crashing since then, you can see that the variations were really much more drastic, and you have the surges adding this effect of extra volume output there and there. And besides the surges, we also had the pulsing, right? And the pulsing, you can see here, non-pulsing regime, lava level. And when it was pulsing, it goes through troughs that are lower and then peaks that are higher, as visible here. And focus on this chart, which I have to get on the screen some more so you can see it here. But once again, a fusion rate over time, and during the pulsing phases from 2000 down to 500 or so, right? You see this up and down variation of rates, but just a scale 500. If I go back to our previous plot here, 500. Oh, where is it? 500 is off my mark, off my map, off my plot, way up out of there, right? So we're not even anywhere in the same stratosphere in these eruptions at the summit here. So very different stuff, which is why we're confident what we've been saying. And really, the bottom line is really that this eruption is most similar to the December 2020 eruption. It's following a very similar pace as far as output of volume, slightly behind. Very similar pace as far as output of gas, and the area of the lava lake shrinking. And that's really it. That's the synthesis of it. We'll get into some more of the data after our questions here, and we'll make sure we attribute everything to the USGS. All this data and comes from their daily updates they're putting out, all their maps and all that. We're kind of compiling it and repackaging it a little bit. But this is where it all comes from here. And so you can see noted in their update as well, for example, the cooled crust now covering a short channel from the pond to the vent cone, for example, and other observations all through there. All right, so I think it's time for some thank yous, Dane.
All right, well, we will jump right into that and get to the questions that we have lined up. Do want to thank people that help make this stream possible. And really, it is the viewers. If you're liking this type of content and you think we should really keep going, make sure to like, subscribe, consider sharing it on your social media. We also do post to hawaiitracker.com. That is our own little place for us to make chronological posts and put everything in order for you. So check us out on hawaiitracker.com. We do take monetary donations on hawaiitracker.com/support if you are so inclined. But really, sharing, liking, subscribing helps out a lot. Commenting definitely helps get the YouTube algorithm going. Do want to thank some of the supporters that we have and the donations on hawaiitracker.com from Jessica N, Robert G, Katrin G, Jana K, Lori H, Robin M, Lynn S, and Linda H. Appreciate it. We also have a couple other sponsors that we want to thank. First one is Kaleo's Bar and Grill in the heart of Pahoa. They also have a new location in Orchid Land, and they are hiring everything from cooks to servers to bartenders. So if you're looking to get a job, check them out for sure. They also do some unique twists on some local dishes. They have indoor, outdoor dining options. So COVID safe policy, all that kind of stuff. Definitely check out Kaleo's Bar and Grill. Second one is Kalani's Tour, and they operate primarily out of Kona, but they do tours all around the island. They do some waterfall tours and some Kona coffee farm tours, but really right now it's, with Kilauea doing what it's doing, it's all about the lava tour and getting a little bit more personalized experience from people that are very knowledgeable about Kilauea, the culture, and some of the history around the whole thing. So definitely check out Kalani Tours if you're coming out here and you want to get that personalized experience to explain the volcano to you. We do have a super chat, a 790 MYR from Malaysia.
Ring it, Malaysian ring it.
Ring it. Good job, Phil. Appreciate it. Appreciate all the support, guys. And with that, I think we can get. Oh, we do have the support from County of Hawaii as well through the Hawaii Community Foundation and the Puna Strong Grant. We really appreciate all their support as well. All right, I think it's time for questions, huh?
Yeah, let's talk about some stuff.
So first one is I'm kind of edited this question and concatenated a few different conversation points, but Obi-san asks, would the sulfur fumaroles on the north side affect the lava? Like what would happen if the lava were to cover a vent, would that impact the eruption?
I think we've seen lava cover a lot of vents already, actually, and it seems to just push the vents further to the edge of the crater wall. So the vents are kind of retreating, right? The ground is all cracked everywhere, and where the gas is venting out is the easiest point for it to reach the surface at some point in time. And then once the lava covers that point, it's no longer the easiest spot, and so it comes out some other part of the crack, and so it seems to be the vents seem to be migrating with the edge of the lava lake, if that makes sense, right? So doesn't seem to be really affecting it that much. Apart from it's cool to watch that, right? If we were to pick out one of those other, if I can find that longer time lapse, I can maybe show that as well. Let's see if I can get it up here.
Yeah, we're showing. Yeah, definitely a lot of vents have been covered so far. From vents that erupted previously to just vents that only did gas.
Yeah, so let's put on the B1 here, and see if we can find some of these gas vents. Look at. We're here on the right side. Have to be. All right, so a little tricky to get it to manipulate the screen to the right size here, but we'll just let it play here. You can see some of these gas vents that occur here on the edge of the crater are fairly far down, right in there. And as the lava level rises, you see them just migrate outwards. Then vents in the uphill part of the blocks become more and more active. Let's see if we can see that happening here. It's in the daytime views. Sometimes you don't see as much of the gas because of relative humidity or something like that. But you can really see here at the edge of the lake all these fumes, right? And might be more useful if I can find an old picture of the previous vents that were all under this area. The crater wall was all yellow underneath here before, right? That's something when we're looking at those pictures. This was one of the brightest yellow spots on the crater wall. And that whole zone is underneath this edge of the lava lake now. So I think that's the best I can do right here, Danny. It's just show
I think that answers it.
Migration of the vents here kind of at the edge of the lake as best as we can with the time lapse that we have prepared.
All right. Matthew asks about the Lower East Rift Zone. Specifically, is the area further down from Pu'u'o still looking like it has a blockage of some kind?
Yeah, we see still the same signals as before, like some deflation all the way to Pu'u'o, showing some connection still that far and some response, right? Maybe depressurizing because of the summit eruption, but beyond that, we don't see any change, like unaffected, as in not well connected. Yeah.
All right. Mr. Jim asks about the islands themselves and the hardened, the already hardened lava and the parts that are still molten, and what's keeping the lava, the hardened lava, from becoming melt again in like a large amount, like reliquefying the island, basically.
So it's all about heat loss, I think, right? There's a lot of heat being lost out of the surface of the lava itself, through the crust of the lake as well, and all these different areas around the crater. The actual gas coming out is carrying some heat too. So ultimately, you have a net loss of heat, which means that some part of it's gonna cool, and may well cool to the solidus, right? The point where it becomes a solid, which you could think of it as a freezing point or the melting point. It's kind of the same thing. But that's the point too. I lost my train of thought there.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense though. As to that, all lava isn't the same temperature, and you can still be in a semi-molten state, or that get into that freeze point and not reliquefy other parts that's already past that freeze point.
Yeah, so you
So to
could
speak.
remelt some areas for sure, right? But
Right.
in other areas, you're going to have to freeze to accommodate that probably as well. Which areas you're likely to remelt are it's probably not the ones that are always able to release the most heat to the surface, right? And as far as the rocks that have the most void space, that trapped gas from early in eruption, that's those island areas that are made of cinder and that lighter material, less dense material. And those islands are all cracked, and we saw one of the fissures come up through the edge of the island. In fact, we've seen steam vents and fumaroles on the islands as well. So it seems like they act like chimneys and allow the heat and the gas to come through them and out. So maybe that makes them less likely to melt for that reason, right? They're kind of kept cool as they're like part of that heat release mechanism. Just kind of discussing some possibilities here, right? But yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to something like that, right? You might melt things to some degree, maybe near the vent where the lava is the hottest and it's coming out, and you're able to keep things open. You can remelt, but further on the far side, maybe don't do that quite as much. Yeah, good question.
Right. Yep, we have a $5 super chat from Sean Huntley, who just says, "Mahalo, appreciate the support." All right. Well, I think with that, we can get back into the second part of the update.
All right, let's see. We'll transition here to talk about the VOG. We talked about the gas output a little bit, but not so much of the impact. The impact of the eruption, still the main one is VOG. There is a new VMAP page here. Dana, I like your cookies, but maybe you want to...
Oh, yeah.
Mahalo. And so here's our new VMAP from UH. And you can see, you can plot the SO4 particulates or SO2, and you can see there is still VOG blowing down southwest of Hawaii Island, or of the volcano on Hawaii Island here, Pahala and Na'alehu areas, and South Kona as well, right? Depending on the wind, we've had some slack winds over the last week. We did have some VOG coming over to Hilo and north around, covering areas of the island like this earlier in the week, depending on which wind direction we actually had. So that's still an impact to be documented. You can see here let's see if this is not going to load as usual, because oh no, there it did come this time. There's our numbers from DOH, Department of Health in the state of Hawaii, and you can see in the green today and yesterday, but still getting into the yellows a couple of days before that. So still coming and going, and there's still impact. And I'm sure that once the wind blew all that VOG to Hilo, everyone on Hilo was like, oh, this is what you guys are talking about over on the Kona side. And I just got it for a few hours of part of one day, probably. All right, so the purple air map gives us a little bit more of the community impact of the particulates. So you can see all those yellows still gathering the Kona side, and pretty clean here in Hilo today once things have cleared out. Earthquakes are still low. We had our beginning of eruption scroll off the edge of the plot here. So earthquakes per day is essentially in this range of 0 to 70, right? And really, it's been more in this 50 to 30 range for recent time. Not a whole lot of change, not a whole lot to see there, to be honest. In the context of the whole last year, we're still down here in this little zone right over there, and so pretty quiet compared to the range of what's happened before. There are still earthquakes happening in Pahala, but that's all as usual. One of the curiosities that we can see here, let me reload this once again, is the GPS we haven't talked about quite yet. But if we zoom in to this very far side, and there's a little bit of a danger in doing this, we'll have to wait for more data next week, right? But it looks like this line maybe is not rising anymore, right? It's like it was clearly rising in a trend, and it seems like maybe it's doing something here, and that's interesting. Why would that trend suddenly change? It could be because of change in the output of the eruption, where maybe more lava is getting out, and maybe that's something like that. But seeing as we don't see anything on a tilt, that's maybe not exactly what's going on. it's worth scrolling back in time a little bit here and reminding ourselves that these previous little dips here and here were actually related to magma moving into the northern part of the southern part of the caldera, close to where it eventually intruded. So the intrusion and magma moving in these intrusion zones in the South Caldera is something that can change this. So there could be a hint of some other subsurface adjustments of the volcano happening with magma moving in other areas through there, perhaps. If so, it seems to be very localized because it's not appearing in any of the big signals there. But a little curiosity to point out for you guys there as well. We can move over to the photos and videos from USGS, and we'll look at this image here from October 29th. And this gives that wider view taken from the south. It's similar to that S1 camera. So you see there's the west vent, and that's the entry point. So from the Kanekakoi overlook, you see a similar view to this. You can see the top of the central island, and you can see probably about that much of the lava lake right there and its whole back crater wall. And you can see and over further over this way as well. So you essentially can see all this molten surface through here. You can see this overflow point when it overflows and goes off this way. You can see ooze up flows happening over here. But you cannot see so much what you can't see from this viewpoint, this southern channel that's off the screen here to the south. I think that's the perspective here. And if I scroll over to the right, it's all the way to the right. This is the low spot of that lowest down drop block that the lava is lifting this hardened crust and oozing out the edge along right through there. Okay, so different perspective. A few days later, this is from November the 1st, I want to say. I click back, it'll tell me November 2nd. Credit to Julie Chang. And so now the views from the west. We were looking previously from there. Now we're looking in different directions, so we can see the central island, and we can see more of that southern sector that we couldn't see before that was hidden below the crater wall there. Right, and our low spots back here once again. You really can see that smaller active surface of lava really retreating back towards the vent as it did last eruption as well. And with some variations, it's on a similar pace now as it was then. All right, here's a view of those ooze up flows, October 29th. Ooze up flows on a margin. This is the southeast margin. And we can come in here and see here's a gas vent that's active on the side, and it continued beyond this lava. It's underneath here also, but the lower part doesn't steam. Everything just migrates up and comes out this zone over here. But if I can zoom in, right in there is this lava flow that is coming up from below, oozing up between this hardened crust, right? And you see several zones of it there. If I can maybe zoom it in an intermediate amount. You see red all through there. And if I move it over, down over here, more down here at the bottom. Now, an example of those ooze up flows. Some more views of the west vent. So this is October 27th, when it was still in those intermittent stages of crusting over that archway. And you see a little bit of crusting over happening here and here, a little further up, right? But still interesting. Similar outflow coming out. There's a sequence of shots taken here. 4 seconds, 4 shots, just so you can get a different view of the spatter. Yeah, second to second. It's constantly changing, and it's just that's why I like to show you guys the videos, even with the time-lapse animations. And one thing that's interesting here is you can see this real red oxidized baked cinder that's making up the actual part of the vent here, right? So this explains why this part is that lighter material that wants to float as well. And there's also a USGS video here that was released of that west vent on November 1st, a few days ago. It does note that the base of the level of the point fluctuates over the time span of minutes, and this video was taken during a time when the base level was higher than it often is, causing the spillway to be wider than normal. So there it is, bubbling up and You can see it's spillway very wide at this point in time, and actually it spilled over. This might have been the last time we saw this real open, wide overflow channel right there. You can still see spattering and adding on to the actual structure of the cone here as well. So November 1st video released today from USGS. There you can see that initial surge that was coming over the whole thing is now dropped, and now you see this the edge of the cone here that since then has built up higher, right? And that's where this is all crusted over since then. Follow USGS, and we'll make sure to finish off the USGS photos with a time lapse that they put out of their own, compiling over time. The whole last year of the camera, which spans from when it had a pond of water in it to when it had the first eruption. There's a pond of water. Here comes the December 2020 eruption, filling lava lake, moving the island, starting to crust over, and eventually slowly withdrawing, closing off that whole surface of the crust. Still active till about now. And then we have hardened crust for about 4 months or so. The lava is building pressure beneath that. We have an intrusion that's off camera, underground, off in that direction to the south. The pressure is building until it pops back out. And there it is. It brings the crust back up. It floods the whole crust there at the end. And floods the crust there at the end, and then it starts retreating back towards the vent as well. Came in, went pretty quick there. But that's the USGS release of that. Pretty cool. So we can come back in and check in on some of our web cameras. Here's our S1 camera for the last 24 hours. I will reload it here and see if we can get a evening view here. So we can see there's that, still has that clear crusted over channel visible, and over the last 24 hours, you can see it hasn't changed a whole lot there. And as far as the whole circulation of the crust, there is a lava. You can see it's circulating and going underneath, right? And it seemed like it was going underneath, closer to these ends of these channels, but now it seems to be retreating further and further back, as if this other end is rising faster to catch up and tipping upwards, and so the whole lake surface is retreating further in. We can check on our B1 camera, just because I'm curious if that low spot over here on the right, it has a couple of spots of glow, but nothing really major. There's no big outbreak of ooze upflow, but probably this crust is still lifting up, and it wouldn't be surprising to see another one of these later tonight or at some point soon. And we can let's check our other web cameras here. I'm going to make sure let's reload all these just so we can scan all the views here while we're looking at the imagery. That's one we just saw, the B1 we just saw. There's the KW, which is similar here, a little bit of ooze ups on the side, but really what I notice most is a lot of crust over here. This area is the one we're going to be losing the fastest. And so that's a big area that'll, in the next iteration of active area, will drop us quite a bit. And scrolling down, some other views from other areas, thermal and Mauna Loa Strip Road is always an epic place to see the panoramic views here, the whole landscape. All right, so that wraps up the imagery. We do have to talk about Volcano Watch. There is a Volcano Watch released today about a volcano in Alaska, Pavlov, so we won't go into a huge amount of detail here, right? But you can see that Pavlov is a volcano that maybe is a little atypical when we're examining the typical signals of tremor and things like that. So that is something to look into, and I'll be posted on HawaiiTracker.com. I won't go over the volcano in Alaska any more detail on that here today. But I do want to note, with a shout out to our Hawaii Tracker contributor, Les Peterson, that we have just hit an anniversary where November 3rd, 1991 was Volcano Watch number 1. Right now, the volcano outreach from the USGS has been long and varied and taken lots of different forms. Right, we've had Volcano Letter, Volcano Watch, just the most recent incarnation of it all. And even so, it came into being 30 years ago yesterday. So mahalo USGS. We thought they might actually put some kind of commemorative article today, but instead it was Alaska. We'll still commemorate them by this little throwback, looking back to Volcano Watch number 1 from November 3rd, 1991. You can see a lot different style of map being produced back in those days, right? You can see what was happening 30 years ago. Is that we had the active vent from Pu'o'o, which was active from 83 to 86, had shifted over to Kupainaha in 86, where it was active until 92. So we're still in the tail ends of Kupainaha. Kupainaha was a lava shield, a lava lake and shield that would overflow and had a long series of lava tubes that came all the way through and impacted Royal Gardens, impacted Kalapana, and all the communities in that area, more so than Pu'o'o originally did, because it actually came with Pahoehoe flows all the way to the coast. Whereas those first original fountains of Pu'o'o, 83 to 86, high fountains, much higher fountains, produced a'a flows that quite often did not make it all the way down to the ocean. They kind of came down the steep hillside and then ran out of momentum. So it was really that change from Pu'o'o to Kupainaha that allowed it to switch its eruption style from high fountains to lava lake, and then mix in more gas and able to have more Pahoehoe flows that were able to travel further. So just a little bit of a throwback in there. I won't go into any more detail than that, but you can see all the updates here. And they talk about how at the time they had just devised a new way using, I think this was the VLF era here, when they were using new geophysical techniques to estimate eruption rates within lava tubes, right? So before that, they'd actually measure the lava on a coastal plain and try to guess how thick it was. And based on how thick they guessed it was, they can get to some volume, and from the volume you get some rate. It's kind of like the clunky stuff we're doing for eruption now. But you actually can go if you have a lava tube, you actually can go and measure its electrical distortion and calculate exactly how much right in there, right? So they actually were able to measure 150,000 cubic meters per day from the lava tube, right? Which, if you take it by day and divide it by 24 and then by another 3,600, that would give you your number per second, right? So maybe help me out, Dane, with that. Can you? 150,000 divided by 36 divided by 2,400.
150,000.
Yeah.
By 26.
24 hours in a day.
By 24.
And divided by 3,600 seconds in an hour.
Oh God, we're getting into the E's.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's low. Sorry.
50.
What would
divided by 3,600.
58,000
divided by 24. So okay, the number I got was 1.7. 1.7 cubic meters per second was the value they were getting out of that lava tube.
Over 60. Yeah.
So for comparison, that's about what I said. We're about 4.1. So that's 1/3 of where we're at now with this current eruption. When lava was coming through the lava tube from Kupainaha to the ocean, for just point of reference right there.
Right.
And yeah, that's that's really it, Danny. If anything else you want to add about Volcano Watch over the years, and of course, people should check our Hawaii Tracker Facebook page and website and all that to get more photos and info.
I mean, the thing that I was noticing while we were going through it, and it's been kind of the trend over the past maybe year that I've been seeing, is just the incorporation of different volcanoes outside of Hawaii more often. Right, when I go back to the old volcano watches, it seems to me that, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems to me like written by HVO about Kilauea or Mauna Loa or Hawaii volcanoes, or the archipelago or whatever, rather specifically, it's kind of taken on new shape in more recent times, it seems.
It goes in cycles, really, because it's always been about the style of the director of the observatory at the time. So Jagger was really into writing about other volcanoes as well, and he often wrote about Italy and Alaska and other places as well. And then, I want to say back in the 50s, they decided to pull back from that a little bit and focus more on Hawaii. And then other directors have then later expanded outwards again, and then others have pulled back in, and so it just kind of comes and goes. But interesting observation, for sure.
Yeah, we do have some super chats I want to acknowledge here real quick. We have a $10 super chat from Robert Waltz, who just says thank you. Appreciate that. Ying has a New Taiwan $60 super chat, and we appreciate that as well. No comment on that. It just shows a cup of coffee. A cup of coffee gif. And our friend Gary Bryan donates $35. Says awesome updates. Thanks, guys. Appreciate continued support, Gary. We do have a couple questions here if you're ready to try and do those.
Yeah, let's do that and wrap it up.
Yeah. So it's from a newer viewer. He's asking about the silica content and the type of volcanoes. The volcanoes that erupt west, he says, do they have a bigger explosion because they're building up pressure, kind of like the Alaska volcano we were just discussing, or like how does that work in general?
So yeah, the question is really. So there's two questions in there, really, the way I see it, right? One is the actual magma type, right? And so yeah, for sure, the magma type definitely affects the style of eruption. So our silica poor, relatively speaking, magma in Hawaii is generally going to erupt more fluidly with a lower viscosity. It's going to be able to flow all the way to the ocean, and it makes big lava shields and shield volcanoes in general. Is the shape of the land here, right? They, I'm gonna keep having to add caveats in here. There is a caveat that they do explode, but they explode from usually interaction with the water rather than from built up inner pressure of the gas themselves, right? The more silica-rich volcanoes, like the ones in Alaska, because the magma is essentially stickier, the bubbles can't escape from it as easily. I've tried to use analogies in the past, like think about the difference between stirring honey, which gets bubbles in it, and bubbles will come out of it eventually, but they'll come out at a much slower rate through the higher viscosity. Then something like water, which you can stir and get bubbles in it also, and you might get some stuck in there, and it will quickly all rise out of there. So. Right. Excuse me. If you have that higher viscosity, then the bubbles can be trapped in there, and they can build up faster than it can be released, and that can lead to an explosive eruption that essentially blows a cap off, like a St. Helens, for example, and that creates the pyroclastic ash cloud and everything else from there.
All right. We have another question here from Obi-Wan. I'm going to try and rephrase this one a little bit. Actually, no. So, yes, when the lava lake first started to crust over, was there a height difference in the lake from the west to the east that we've heard documented by USGS? Or how does that process unfold? Is there a chicken and egg type of thing, or is one happening while the other one's happening? The crusting process is creating the conditions for the offset lake or the uneven lake levels.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to what the scan was like before. Mm-hmm. I can know that there are differences, right? So, pardon me.
Don't die on us.
I might just have to cough somewhere. It's just from dry throat and nothing serious going on over here. At the end of the last eruption, when we looked at the height of the lava surface, I want to say it was somewhere around 749 meters or meters above sea level, something like that. And when this eruption began, it seemed to be down at 744. If you calculate and go back and without going into the details of it, there seems to be some difference between since eruption ended and when it began, as far as a measurement of the surface, right? So that's really interesting because what happened in between there? Clearly there was some subsidence, some settling, but did it settle evenly? Did it settle more in the eastern part or more in the western part? I just don't know. We know that something that certainly was different. I would expect almost more settling in the west because that's the area that the active lava lake was active the longer, right? So I don't know. I think more so that the vent is in the west, is has been bulging it up, is likely what's causing the tilting. And a tilting was noted by the USGS, I want to say within 3 days of the start of the eruption. So it was something that seemed like it happened pretty early on. And it wasn't just tilted from west to east, it was also tilted from south to north. And that seemed to be true because there was also a vent in the south early on that was erupting through the lava lake in the southern margin. So they said that the west was higher than the east and the south was taller than the north. And then once that southern fountain died off, they stopped mentioning the south and north difference, and it seems like that re-equilibrated. So
do you think though that the magma coming up through the vent right in that area is pushing the cap? We'll call the solidified of the top of the previous eruption, the cap. Is it pushing the cap up in those very localized areas, or is it just the distribution of that lava from the source, and it doesn't instantly pool like water, and it works out more slowly than that, creating some unevenness in it as it cools?
Yeah, I mean that's another good question. I mean I don't know. My intuition's telling me it's actually pushing it up. I mean,
right. That's what it seems like.
Almost like a like when we see lava coming out of that little lava tube in the vent right now. There's almost a standing wave at the bottom, right, where it kind of bulges back up. And so imagine it's coming up from depth and suddenly is decompressing there. It just bulges up, even if it's just the gas coming and flowing, right? So
yeah,
I don't know, but yeah, great.
That cap though, I mean, just thinking out loud here, before the eruption, I would have said it was a lot more sturdy and robust than it seems to appear in this eruption. It seems very malleable and able to, shape and move with the eruption. It's kind of weird to watch it be so able to adapt without completely compromising itself.
Yeah, it's very interesting, right? Because speaking of what parts of the lava could be remelting and whatever else, right? Imagine, if anything, it might be the bottom of that crust that's formed, right? And the crust that forms on the new skin that forms in the lake is what's getting recycled. That stuff's got the best chance to melt because it's super thin. But otherwise, the bottom of that crust might be melting, possibly. If not melting, it could be heating up enough to become ductile and actually flow without breaking and cracking at the bottom. The top might be breaking and cracking because it's cooler and more brittle, but the bottom may not. Maybe more fluid and malleable, like a warm putty, right? It's like a block of putty that's like warm on the bottom and cold on the top, something like that, where it's behaving slightly differently. Yeah, it's fascinating.
I mean, one of the things that I've wondered about is if that cap would end up breaking itself apart, where we get those like that iceberg overturning effect on that one big island or something along those lines, as it lost integrity entirely and was compromised, but seems to be holding up pretty well, that cap.
Yeah, and I think that that's possibly, we've often wondered, how do you get to that whole epimagma situation from the lava lake of 100 years ago? And right, if you keep reworking and remelting and making it ductile and deforming it this way and that way and adding a little bit of that, this may well be the origin of a epimagma plug that's gonna be in that crater for a while, right?
And can you expand real quick? What is epimagma for somebody?
Epimagma is just that term that Jagger would use for the lava that's not actually that makes up call it like the shores and the bottom of the lake itself, right? It's not actually like a lava flow, but it's more of the lava goo almost. That's maybe the old material that's still able to flow, but it's not as gas rich, and it's not exactly lava anymore, if that makes sense.
Right. All right. Well, I think that gets through the questions that I have prepared here or pulled out, and a little bit of my own thrown in as well. Appreciate
Yeah.
everybody that stopped by and contributed, threw a question out. Hope we got them answered. If we didn't get everything answered in chat or Philip addressing it directly, try again next week. We do go through chat, so we're not ignoring you, but there are a lot of questions across all the different social media platforms.
Yeah, and we could probably pull out the Kilo Iki study of that first 2 years of crustal thickness formation that was drilled, and maybe you can get a better estimate of how thick that crust might have been, for example. We'll be just, that's like a thread we can pull out a little more in the future there as well. So
definitely,
we can definitely get at that after that a little more. So mahalo.
All right, well, that'll do it for me. Make sure anybody that hasn't done it so far, make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment. It really does help with the YouTube algorithm and getting seen by more people and all that fun jazz. And I will pass it back to you. Thank you.
Mahalo, you guys. Yeah, mahalo. I see Nathan is giving me that. I was trying to make my math easier by giving me how many seconds in a day. So mahalo, you guys, for interacting and following along and being part of our broadcast here today. So that makes it. This is really the best way to stay connected with you guys. So mahalo for interacting. We'll be back with you guys next week unless something else brings us to the forefront sooner. We'll have lots of short videos to release in the meantime, so look for that. Nothing today. We'll probably be putting them out tomorrow as the day goes on tomorrow. And so, yeah, thanks again once again everyone who contributed, donations, questions, and by liking, sharing, subscribing. That really does help. I know everyone says it, but yeah, please, if you're still watching and haven't clicked the button, then it's about that time. So shoots, guys. Until next week, for Dane DuPont and Hawaii Tracker, I'm Philip Ong.